Hello, my friends. How are you? Welcome to another episode of 30 Albums for 30 Years, 1964 through 1994, where I take a look at the 30 most impactful albums per year during those years. So 30 albums for each year, totaling 900 albums. Somehow I'm going to make it there. I don't really know. But right now we are still evaluating the albums of 1965. And today's record probably just snuck in. It's a great record, don't get me wrong. I love it. But this one was on the bubble, and I chose to include it. This is Art Blakey's Free For All, Blue Note Records, recorded February 10th of 1964, released sometime in July 1965. So let's get into it. Art Blakey's Free For All. Okay, so if you're not familiar with who Art Blakey is, here it is. Here's the art of Blakey, if you will. Art Blakey was one of, if not the hardest swinging drummers ever. His often aggressive polyphonic drum solos and his incredible sense of groove made him one of jazz's most sought after and celebrated percussionists. He was simply incredible. Beyond his virtuosic talent as a drummer, he was also a fantastic and impactful band leader. He's a style innovator who's widely responsible for helping to develop and popularize a jazz style known as hard bop. Hard bop fused jazz bebop elements along with other African American based styles like blues, gospel, and R&B. As a leader, he helped to introduce some of the biggest stars in jazz. Some of his sidemen include Lee Morgan, Wayne Shorter, Freddie Hubbard, Benny Golson, Cedar Walton, the Marsalis brothers, Wynton and Branford, and many, many others. So you need to know who Art Blakey is. Very important to the trajectory of jazz and the jazz tradition. Okay, so let's take it back to the beginning. Arthur Blakey was born in Pittsburgh, October 11th, 1919. He's one of the many legends born in the Iron City of Pittsburgh. Great jazz tradition there. His mother was believed to be a single mom who died shortly after Art Blakey was born, so the drummer was mainly raised with his siblings by a family friend. As a youth, it is believed that he received some piano lessons, but was mostly self-taught. Piano was his first instrument. And it has been reported that by the 7th grade, he was working as a full-time pianist. In the early 1930s, he switches to drums, and according to folklore, he was forced to make that switch to make room for pianist Errol Gardner, a very famous jazz pianist by a club owner, who threatened Blakey with a gun, telling him he had to give up his piano bench and take up a drum stool. So he did. And Blakey got into the drums, of course, and patterned much of his style after the hard-hitting swing drummers of the 1920s like Chick Webb and Sid Catlett. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, Art Blakey was touring with legendary pianist Mary Lou Williams, and then with famed band leader Fletcher Henderson with his orchestra. While with the Henderson group, Blakey was badly beaten by a police officer. The attack was supposedly unprovoked, but the incident left Blakey with a steel plate in his head, and it made him unfit for service during World War II. So while other drummers were forced to join the war effort or had volunteered, Blakey remained in the States, and he became a first-call drummer. Partly out of necessity because there was a need for drummers, but also because he was very talented. From 1944 to 1947, he worked with the smooth-voiced singer Billy Eckstine in his orchestra, and he befriended many of Eckstine's sidemen. Eckstine really liked to hire younger, more experimental musicians. And this includes Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis, Dexter Gordon, Fats Navarro, singer Sarah Vaughan, and others. All those names that I just mentioned, along with Art Blakey, would go on to represent the next wave of jazz stars looking to further the possibilities of the repertoire by performing in the radically more advanced style known as bebop. Bebop called for a further focus on virtuosic improvisation, faster tempos, more exploratory harmonic elements, that's the way the chords move, along with a deeper focus on individualistic self-expression. Now, Eckstein dismantled his band in 1947. He just couldn't make it work anymore. Large groups were falling out of favor. And Blakey traveled to Africa for the first time. It was an experience that deeply inspired him, not only as a drummer, but also as a spiritual being. And during this trip, he converted to Islam and practiced it for some time. I believe he stopped in 1950. That same year, 1950, he began working in smaller group ensembles with many of his ex-Eckstein bandmates. This includes Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, and others not associated with Eckstein directly, like Thelonious Monk and Bud Powell. Okay, so let's talk about Art Blakey, the band leader, and the formation of the Jazz Messengers. Blakey made his first recordings as a leader for Blue Note Records early 1950s with a group that he called Art Blakey's Messengers. He then focused his energy on leading a big band called the 17 Messengers, but having a big band in the early 1950s was just not easy, it was hard, and that group did not last long. So then he hooks up with pianist-composer Horace Silver. The two jazz giants recorded together in 1952, and some of their early recordings listed Blakey as a leader, and some listed Horace Silver as a leader, and then by 1954, they began using the name the Jazz Messengers. Now, not long after that, Horace Silver leaves the group. He splits from sharing leadership duties with Art Blakey. He goes his own way, has incredible success. We checked out one of his albums already, Horace Silver's Song for My Father. You should listen to that episode if you have not already. Silver's apparent concerns had to do with the heavy usage of heroin within the group. But Blakey continues to use the Jazz Messengers name and performs with an ever-changing lineup of mostly younger, up-and-coming jazz stars. The Messengers' playing style consisted mainly of presenting a tightly arranged melody, then having extended solos, and then returning to that main melody. That's consistent with a lot of jazz. Several early Jazz Messengers recordings found crossover success and were featured on jukeboxes in predominantly African-American inhabited areas. Now, Blakey, he kept the Jazz Messengers going forever, till 1990. That's the same year he passed. And the band represented over 50 years of jazz greatness, making Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers one of the most impactful jazz groups of the second half of the 20th century. All right, so that takes us to our album Free For All, recorded in 1964, and it represented one of Blakey's most celebrated lineups in their final year. They started in 1961. The group included Freddie Hubbard on trumpet, Wayne Shorter on tenor saxophone, Curtis Fuller on trombone, Cedar Walton on piano, and Reggie Workman on the bass. All fantastic musicians. Each would continue to have success after leaving the Jazz Messengers. The record includes 4 tracks, that's it, only 4. 2 were written by Wayne Shorter, 1 by Freddie Hubbard, and 1 by pianist-composer Clare Fischer. It was intended that there would be more songs, 3 more songs on the record. Apparently there were attempts, but no valid takes were recorded or accepted. Additionally, the musicians tried a second take of the title track, Free For All, which had to be stopped because Art Blakey's drums apparently broke. So what we have is 4 incredible tracks and a fantastic album, Free For All.